Hi quilters! Welcome to the second video in our series of quilts and projects using 5-inch squares or charm packs. Start with 2 matching charm packs and find matches of 2 5-inch squares. The charm packs I used were called Willow by One Canoe Tube from Moda. I pinned the matching squares together to help with organization. Some of the fabrics in the charm packs have 2 squares in the pack, some only have 1 per pack. It will all depend on the fabric line. I had originally planned to match pairs with another pair of charms of a different color from the same charm pack. I had planned to use just the 2 charm packs, but after doing some math, I realized the project would only be 32 inches by 40 inches. I decided to add 2 more charm packs of a background color to make the quilt 48 inches by 56 inches, a lap size versus a smaller baby quilt. Instead of finding white charm packs, I would have needed 2. I decided to cut yardage into 5-inch squares. I used 1 3/4 yards to get 84 squares that I needed. From the yardage, I cut 11 strips that were 5 inches by the width of fabric. I subcut the strips into 5-inch squares. I was able to get 88 squares out of the 11 strips, and I only needed 84 for my project. For this project, each block will be 8.5 inches unfinished or 8 inches finished in the quilt, and you will use 4 charms, 2 of a background and 2 of a color to make 1 block. 4 charm packs with 42 squares per package will equal 168 squares. 2 of the charm packs are pattern fabrics, 2 of the charm packs are background fabrics. So that will be a total of 42 blocks. To help keep me organized, I pinned piles together that had 2 background squares and 2 matching charms from the charm packs. There isn't a set pattern for this quilt because I'm going to give you lots of options and different ways that you can arrange the blocks. Once you have everything sorted, it's time to sew. Each of the sets will be sewn the same way. Layer the background squares right sides together with the charm pack squares. You can draw a line corner to corner on the wrong side of one of the background squares and sew a 1/4 inch away from the line on both sides, or if you prefer, you can use diagonal seam tape or a similar product to help guide you where to sew. For the other set of squares, you will sew a 1/4 inch seam on opposite sides of the square. Make sure you sew on both sides of the diagonal line and both sides of the square. Every set of 2 squares that have a background and a fabric from the charm pack will be sewn the same way, 1 on the diagonal and 1 straight. At first, I sewed the square sets just 1 at a time so that I made sure I was getting the 1 sewn on the diagonal and the 1 sewn straight. But after a while, once I got the rhythm of it, I was able to chain stitch these through the machine and sew a bunch at the same time. You can either sew 1 set at a time or you can chain stitch. It's up to you. Do whatever method makes more sense to you. I sent the whole pile through the machine, cut them off at the end, used my Blade Saver thread cutter to cut them apart, and then sent them through the machine again to do the other side. Once they're all sewn, it's time to cut the squares. For the ones that have been sewn on the diagonal, you need to cut between the diagonal lines. For the squares that have been sewn on opposite sides of the square, cut these in half both directions. I used 2 small rulers and found the 2.5 inch mark on both of the rulers to find the center on where to cut. Move one away to make the cut, and then do the same in the other direction, cutting it into 4 equal sections. Each of these sections should be a 2.5 inch square. Diagonal lines will mean a diagonal cut. Straight lines will mean a straight cut. At first, I just did one set at a time until I kind of got into the rhythm of what I was cutting. After a while, I would lay out several at one time and just go through them and make all the cuts as needed. Laying out more than one set at a time did help speed up the cutting process. Now it's time to press. For both of these cuts, you will be pressing away from the background fabric or toward the darker fabric. Make 2 matching 4-patch units from the 4 pieces cut from the square. Once pressed, these 4-patch units will measure 4.5 inches by 4.5 inches. Make all of the 4-patch units out of the pieces cut and set aside the half-square triangle units. Once all the 4-patch units have been sewn and cut apart, head over to the ironing board. Press the seams to one side. If you prefer, you could also press the seams open. Take the pile of the half-square triangle blocks over to the cutting mat, and we're going to trim each of these squares to 4.5 inches by 4.5 inches. I used my 4.5-inch block lock ruler to get it all perfectly aligned. Put the ruler on the seam. The groove on the back makes this very simple. Cut 2 sides, spin it to the other side, and cut the remaining 2 sides. You can use any square ruler that has a diagonal line that you can set on the seam to see where you're trimming. Once all these pieces are trimmed, we'll have everything we need to start constructing the blocks. Each block will be made with 2 4-patch blocks and 2 half-square triangle blocks made with the matching fabrics. This is where the fun begins. There are many different ways that you can arrange these 4 pieces for your blocks, so you have decisions to make. You can play around with them a little while to figure out what kind of block is to your liking. Honestly, you can make dozens of quilts with this simple idea just by changing the block and then rearranging the blocks when you lay them out. It would also be easy to make this quilt bigger just by adding more charm packs of both the patterned fabric and the plain fabric. You could even do pairs of matching charm packs with one background, or you could have pairs of matching charm packs with a couple different backgrounds. It's all up to you. Each of these blocks will also make secondary patterns when you start sewing the blocks together. Just keep rearranging the pieces until you find one that you like. And this is the one that I've decided to go with. My plan is to make some that have light in the center and some that have the darker fabric in the center, kind of like opposites of each other. I had originally thought to make all of them exactly the same, but with a secondary pattern in the center, I wanted to alternate the light and the darks. I don't know what the final setting of my quilt will be, but I'm going to make all the blocks first and then figure that out. Now it's time to piece the blocks together using 1/4-inch seam allowances. I usually laid out 2 blocks at a time, especially when I had matching fabrics. I would have the light in the center for one of them and the dark in the center for the other. I sent the blocks through the machine in the order in which they were laid out. Carefully do 1 block at a time and then cut the blocks apart in sets of 2. At the moment, these 2 sections are being held together by the thread. Once you've checked that you have the pieces laid out correctly, fold them down and sew the seam going the other direction. I did not stop and press at this moment. I just made sure that the seams were flipped towards the 4-patch units. They should nest together at the center seam. Always double check that you've sewn the blocks correctly. Once I got done with all the sets that had matching fabrics, then I got into the single block sets. I would make one that had the light fabric in the center and one that had the dark fabric in the center. The goal is to have an equal number of light center and dark center blocks. Once all your blocks have been made, it'll be time to press. For these blocks, I'm going to press for the back side first. I'll press towards the 4-patch unit on both sides of the blocks, and then that center seam, I'm going to press that seam open just to reduce bulk. When I press from the back, I usually flip it around to the front at the end and make sure that I haven't pressed any creases into it. Once all the blocks have been pressed, it'll be time to lay it out and figure out how you want to set it. You have 42 blocks, will be 6 across and 7 down. I had originally thought I wanted to lay it out 6 by 7, alternating the blocks so they would kind of form a secondary pattern with the squares kind of set on point. And then I tried an alternate setting where they were alternating dark and light, but all set the same way, facing the same direction. And I fell in love with this setting because I have light rows with dark squares and dark rows with light squares. Sew the rows together, pressing seams in one direction. Alternate the seam direction for each row. Sew the rows together and press. Layer with batting and backing, quilt as desired, and bind. I'm very happy with the way this quilt turned out. I think it looks terrific. The finished size was 48.5 by 56.5. Here is the quilt made with the willow fabric. I just did a quilting design of loops on there, something really simple just to let the fabric shine. And I did a kind of an eggshell colored thread. And for the binding, we found a little pink that kind of matched. And the backing was just a green fabric. I made a second sample of this pattern using a different block setting. The dark and light in this block mirror each other. It's a little bit easier to see when it's set on point. I made all of the blocks the same, and then I had a lot of fun playing around with the settings. These blocks were all made with leftovers from other projects, so all the lights are leftovers and all the blues are mostly just 2 colors, but all left over from other projects. One thing I like to do is to rearrange the blocks and then take a picture with my phone so that when I go back through and want to see which setting I like the best, I just have to look at my phone and then I can recreate it from the picture. This block is made with the same 4 pieces, 2 4-patch units, and 2 half-square triangle units. It's just amazing how many different looks you can get from the same blocks. Just keep rearranging the blocks until you get a setting that you like. It would also be easy to make this bigger or smaller just by adding or subtracting blocks. I didn't add borders to any of my quilts for this video, but that would be another way to easily make your project just a little bit bigger. In the end, this was the setting that I liked the most, so that's how I finished it. This quilt top ended up being 5 blocks across and 6 blocks down. The finished measurements were 40.5 by 48.5. Here is the finished quilt. In all its glory, it turned out fabulous. I love the design. For quilting, I did this kind of floral design in there. I used white thread. For the binding, we picked out a blue and white stripe. That looks really nice on the edge. The backing is just little blue flowers. Very cute. One charm pack is perfect for making a runner. I didn't make 8.5-inch blocks for this setting, but I did set the individual half-square triangle units and 4 patches as the blocks, alternating as I went along. This one is 3 across and 11 down. The finished size was 12.5 by 44.5. Here is another look at some of the block options that you have. And here's a bonus idea for you. We used charm packs to make this quilt, but you could use the same technique using 2.5-inch squares or mini charms or 10-inch squares or layer cakes. Blocks made from the mini charms would end up finished size of 3 inches. Blocks made with layer cakes would have a finished size of 16 inches. Honestly, this technique would work for any size square that you had, as long as you had 2 pieces that were matching of a light and 2 pieces that were matching of a dark. Don't be afraid to cut apart your fabric and play a little. Have some fun. I achieved no progress on using up my charm packs this month because while I used the equivalent of 8 charm packs for all the projects in this video, I also found 8 charm packs while cleaning, so better luck next month. We hope that you will remember to hit the like button, leave us a comment, share with your quilting friends, and subscribe. Thanks for watching and happy quilting!